Okay, let's go to the value range mode. And value range works like this. When it's set to value, it's basically a limiter. And what a limiter is basically a version of a compressor, but the limiter has a very high ratio. And it basically, once you set the threshold, that is your ceiling. That's your new ceiling. Levels can't go past that in an audio compressor. When I set this to value and I have this value slider, that's basically what I'm doing. I'm limiting the loudest velocity that can be played from the incoming MIDI notes. And using this slider, I can basically limit it to whatever velocity I want. So let's limit it way down here to like 25. So everything feels like it's hitting the ceiling. Nothing can play louder than velocity of 25. Gives you very little dynamic range there, right? All right. Let's switch to range. I'm going to take the first slider and I'm going to say I don't want any velocities less than, let's say, 35. So everything's going to play at least 35 velocity, but I don't want anything to play higher than, let's say, 75. So basically I have a 40, not dB, but 40 velocity dynamic range from 35 to 75. So everything is playing at least 35, and nothing's playing more than 75. The final mode you have is add scale. So let's just deal with the scale slider here at the top. The scale slider works in percentages. So when it's set at 100%, all of the MIDI coming in goes out exactly the same way it came in. It's doing nothing at that point. Right? But if I scale this, let's say if I scale it to back to where it was at 50%, then MIDI notes that come in, let's say, for instance, at a value of 60 are actually being sent out at a value of 30. It's cutting everything in half. And if I scale it up to, let's say, 200, which is all the way at the top, then that same information that came in at 60 is now double, which will be 120. Now, 127 is still the highest. So let's say, for instance, you have a MIDI note with a velocity value of 75, right? Double 75 will give you 150, but there is no 150 in the velocity range. So it'll just hit the ceiling at 127. So these really loud notes that are already here, they don't really get turned up much because they're already in the 110 and this one is at the 120 range. But these quieter notes get turned up quite a bit. Option click to put this back at 0. Now the add slider down at the bottom kind of does the same thing, but just not based on percentages. So let's say I can be very specific, say, hey, I want to add an additional 10 velocities to each one of my MIDI notes. So anything that was, let's say, for instance, in this case, 12 down here is now 22. If it is 110, it is now 120. And then I can reduce, right? If I go down this way, negative, and take 50 off, negative 50. Maybe I should just type it in. All right, so now let's say, for instance, something up here that's 120. If you take 50 away from that, you'll get 80. And these really quiet ones that are like at 10 and 12, they're just going to be reduced to 1. Almost non-existent. So the scale slider just reduces or adds based on percentages, and the add slider actually does it based on values.